The Institute. Portrayed in the events that occurred in Fallout 4, the Institute are considered one of the most mysterious, yet brilliant organizations. Utilizing the revolutionary inventions of synths, the Institute is destined to reshape the Wasteland. Today, I jump into a Hearts of Iron 4 Old World Blues game to explore one possible simulation of how the Institute could have obtained complete control. We need to be aware of our surrounding neighbors. If you've played Fallout 4 before, you might recognize these factions. The very first thing that we started was the abductions of people. Then we immediately began eradicating the raiders that surrounded Greater Boston. In doing so, we acquired more factories to fuel our production. The roving warbands of raiders were no match for Institute forces. Our conquest of the Commonwealth was only beginning. After that, the gunners were next. We had to get rid of all potential threats. It was only a matter of time before we replaced Mayor McDonough. With the Diamond City mayor under our control, we orchestrated a war between Diamond City and Goodneighbor. We assured that both sides were weary of fighting before finally setting our plan into motion. The entire settlement of Diamond City had been replaced with synths, and Mayor McDonough, he became a grotesque, skeletal machine that answered only to the Institute. There was nothing that stood between us in complete control of the Commonwealth. But suddenly, an unexpected turn of events, the Enclave landed their armies off the coast of Quincy. Enclave troops spearheaded deep into downtown Boston. We were nearly overwhelmed, but eventually we encircled the enemy and they were utterly obliterated. Now it was time to deploy our highly sophisticated synth agents into all the known world. Controlling the entire northeastern region, we were now considered a superpower, along the likes of the NCR and Caesar's Legion. We still had plenty of work to do before we would encounter the powerhouses that resided in the West. Plenty of smaller tribes to conquer, plenty of more people to replace. Our synth agents were equipped with armored war buggies, medical emergency kits, flamethrowers, and cybernetic warhounds, which was effective in cleaning up the remaining factions on the East Coast. The majority of opposing armies were generally strictly infantry. When engaged in battle, synth units were to break through enemy formations using armored war cars. Once the bulk of the opposing force had been penetrated, designated synth agents would rout the enemy with flamethrowers. Amongst the disarray and chaos, the cybernetic war dogs, who were digitally controlled by a leading synth commander, would chase down stragglers and fleeing survivors. This tactic served as a sort of blitzkrieg in the Wasteland, and it proved to be unmatched in the eastern seaboard. Now, the Institute had taken control of territories stretching from Ontario in the far north all the way down to Virginia in the south. With the east practically in the palms of our hands, we turned our attention to the west. But our first obstacle would be the powerful factions that fortified the Great Plains. We had to subjugate the Iron Alliance and the Enclave in Chicago first. So we studied our enemies closely. We took note of four main powers: Heaven's Gate, the Withered Dogs, the Western Brotherhood of Steel, and Vulpes Legion, formerly Caesar's Legion. Of these four superpowers, we had our sights on the Legion first. It is wise to snuff out an aggressive tribe. The Legion already had minor territories in the east. We declared war and quickly wiped out their foothold. With our armies marching steady, we pushed our way into the Midwest. We battled through Cleveland and aimed for Chicago next. We made sure to be well prepared. The Enclave were unlike those loose tribes of raiders and mutants that we had conquered before. They were well provisioned and had many units of power armor. While already at war with the Iron Alliance, the Institute decided to initiate another war with the Enclave. This was a grave mistake. We split our army into two separate battle groups. The first group was to push through Middle America and straight into the Legion, while the second battle group would begin their offense from Detroit and fight their way into the heart of Chicago. The Southern Army Group seemed to be winning against the Iron Alliance. The terrain was flat and relatively easy to traverse, which allowed for quick battles and decisive victories. So we advanced our forces forward towards the Legion. Detroit, however, was going to be the hardest battle the Institute will ever fight. The battle for Detroit had begun. Enclave powered armored divisions encircled Institute forces and overtook the Detroit harbor almost immediately. Meanwhile, our Southern Army Group had made first contact with the Legion. Institute divisions dug into defensive positions around a city called the Junction. Though the Institute Army was superior in every way, we found ourselves surrounded and overwhelmed by their sheer numbers. It was inevitable that we would run out of supplies. With both fronts looking bleak, we had but one choice. We invited the withered dogs into an alliance. Without an ally, it would be impossible to recover from the grave mistakes we had made. The bloody battle for Detroit raged on. Institute synths and Enclave bodies littered the streets. Countless innocents died in the war zone, caught between the crossfire of flamethrowers and plasma rifles. With the help of our new ally, we began to slowly gain an edge over our enemies. A large portion of Enclave troops had been split from the Battle of Detroit to fight against the withered dogs that ravaged the backside of their country. This allowed for the Institute to capitalize on that window of opportunity. The Enclave finally capitulated, and their lands were split between the Institute and their ally. In the midst of all this, the Western Brotherhood of Steel took full advantage of the situation and absorbed the Legion. And now, the final war to conquer the known world of Fallout. It was the Institute against the Brotherhood of Steel. The battles were brutal and difficult. It took months of intense fighting before the Institute finally broke the Brotherhood front lines. Once their main army had been defeated, their fate had already been sealed. Institute forces marched straight towards Shady Sands. It was finally over. World conquest was finally at the fingertips of the Institute. Once the Brotherhood was absorbed, every other tribe and faction easily fell. It took only a short matter of time before we controlled the entire former United States.